Hello there, ThandoBookClub lovers. We're so glad to be back in the studio with a new season just for you. And this season's going to have a little bit of a different flavor to it. We're putting your favorite books from your favorite authors center stage, and it'll be taking the form of a book review discussion. And we thought, who else would be better to help us have a meaty discussion on books that you love than our favorite, fabulous, amazing, intelligent, and vivacious book reviewer, Sarah Nyengerai. Welcome.
Thank you, Selina. I'm excited and happy to be here.
And we're so glad to have you join us.
Thank you.
As is our custom, we always begin every episode with a quote from a famous African that we believe captures the spirit and message of the book we'll be discussing. And because this is a season with a different flavor, we've decided to switch it up with the quotes too, and we'll be choosing a quote from the book of the day for every quote starting each episode. So today's quote is, "He will never think that he did enough, and he will never understand that I did not think he should have done more." And that quote is from Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So, Sarah, kick us off today by telling us what you like about Chimamanda.
Thank you, Selina. Chimamanda is an author that needs no introduction. What I love about her is her approach to tackling issues, social, cultural, economic, and political issues that affect society. Her hard-hitting approach to addressing cultural practices that we should change. She's known for advocating that culture is never static and evolve. So any practice that is oppressive and not progressive must be dealt with. Of course, she's passionate about women empowerment and girl children. And her hard-hitting stance on these issues. Also, she's not afraid to put herself into change. She says she's unlearning a lot of things that we've grown up to think as natural, or normal rather.
Yeah, you're so right. And I do think one of Chimamanda's strengths as a writer, and definitely as a person of influence in our generation and in the modern world today, is her ability to take us through concepts, social issues and stages of life on a personal level as well. Her recent essay on grief upon the loss of her father in 2021 is a good example. But my personal favorite is her feminist manifesto. I love that little book of essays because I think she really made the feminist cause very relatable. And she really put it into a perspective that I found really, really worthy of our attention and our adoption. Of course, I think another thing that's really amazing about Chimamanda that I think shines through in Purple Hibiscus is that she comes from academic stock. Her parents both worked at University of Nigeria, and her mother was the first female registrar in Nigeria. And Chimamanda herself has had a long academic, illustrious career. And so you see, I think, a picture of that in one of the characters in Purple Hibiscus, who also happens to work at the University of Nigeria. So going through the novel, what were your overall impressions of the book, Purple Hibiscus?
Thank you again, Selina. Purple Hibiscus is my favorite of her books. And I reviewed it last. And it was intentional that I saved it because I knew what the storyline was about. Domestic violence, which you cannot read without absorbing or getting affected. So it's a brilliant book and touches, unfortunately on an issue that still remains relevant in our daily lives that affects so many women and so many children. She did an amazing job and she brings character to the experience.
Yeah, totally. So Purple Hibiscus is a book that traces the coming-of-age story of Kambili, a young Nigerian girl, at a particular time in Nigeria's history. It starts when she's at the age of 15, a little bit naive, a little bit, her father's the most important person in her life. And then as the political situation in Nigeria changes, and because of her father's influence being a wealthy man, and working in journalism and all of these other interests, they have to move to where her aunt is based, and her aunt happens to be a professor at the University of Nigeria. And there she goes through all of these experiences, and the coup in this period of time sort of resolves itself. And at the end of the book, the family has changed, and she has turned 18. So I agree with you. It's a powerful story. It's also my favorite. And it's actually the book I read and reviewed first of Chimamanda's, actually. So I really, really, really enjoyed it. And everything I've read of Chimamanda's afterwards has not been hit the same way for me as Purple Hibiscus did. I just think there was just something about her voice that was unique and beautiful there. But let me pause there for a moment. Well, we're running out of time for this segment, but we'll be back shortly. In the meantime, if you want to grab your copy of Purple Hibiscus or buy one, do that and join us for the discussion, because we'll keep talking about this online even after this show airs. See you soon. Hello, we're back in the studio discussing Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie with our favorite book reviewer, Sarah Nyengerai. So Sarah, we've talked about impressions of the book. We've discovered that we both really like this book a lot. And now I want to just have a chat with you about who were your favorite characters and who were your least favorite characters in this book.
Thank you, Selina. I have two favorite characters, the siblings, Kambili and her brother Jaja. They have a very special relationship as victims of childhood abuse within the home. Jaja tries to protect his mother and his sister from the wrath of their father. And there are instances in which he covers for them, takes the blame if something's happened, and he says it was me, just to spare them from another severe beating. The consequences of the abuse carry on throughout their lives. So I loved that relationship that they had. And the quote you opened with, that was Kambili talking about her brother, that I wish he knew that he didn't need to have done more. Okay. Obviously, my least favorite is a given, the father, and this is because he's the main perpetrator of abuse, with severe consequences to the family. And there is a reason why he turned out that way, and Chimamanda walks us through that. And you can have a bit of sympathy understanding where it came from, because it's quite traumatic as you continue reading. But you then realize as she brings it in that, oh, he was just a childhood victim himself, and he perpetrated abuse because he had been abused. It was his way of understanding life. This is how you handle people that make mistakes. Yeah.
Definitely. I think Kambili's dad is really a very interesting character for me. He's not my favorite, and he's not my least favorite. I am sympathetic to his journey, but I find him very interesting because he's a very strong Catholic, right? Very big into British imperialism. He's more British than the British, right? And has this deprecating view of African culture, Nigerians, right? Even his own father, and that complicated relationship. And what I found so interesting about him is, for a man with so much power, someone so revered by the different communities around him, and someone who enjoys that, but somebody so ardent, like the scenes of them in church, so faithfully ardent. His hidden, dark, sort of secret sin of being violently abusive shows the very opposite, a lack of faith and a deep, deep sense of fear and lack of control. So I found him very, very interesting to think about, to observe his journey. I also think that the way that the book is structured in terms of the cast of characters is very interesting. For me, there are three groups. So they're the group that I call the outspoken anti-feminists. Yes. Then there are the bullies, the dad, And then there are the silent people who are finding their voice, who would be Beatrice, Kambili's mother, and Kambili herself. And what I find is the juxtaposition between the outspoken, because there are other characters like Ade Cocker, the journalist as well. And these are righteous, fiercely righteous people. And they are using their voice in an aggressive way, but they're doing it to heal and to champion life. And then you've got somebody who's doing it in a violent and oppressive way, in a two-faced way as well. So I found that very interesting, the relationship of silence in terms of how the characters play out in the story. Now, quickly, just before we go to break, what key lessons stood out for you?
Okay, I've got 3. Abuse begets abuse. Perpetrators of abuse tend to be childhood victims who perpetuate violence as adults. Extreme religion or misguided religion is a common cause of crimes such as domestic violence. Mm-hmm. Domestic violence goes beyond being a social ill, it is a crime. Mm-hmm. Okay. Lastly, long after the physical wounds have healed, victims are left with an array of emotional scars, which they have to work through.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and I think that long-term impact is also shown really, really well in the book, especially the latter half of the book for me, in the way that things are resolved. But let's just pause here. We'll be taking a short break and we'll be back in a few minutes to discuss Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And we'll be doing a reading from the book as well. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back. You're just in time for the last segment of today's show, and we're talking Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and we've got the fabulous book reviewer, Sarah Nyengerai, with us in studio to help us review this book. So Sarah, what were some of the unique strengths of this book for you?
Thank you, Selina. I would say contrast is a key highlight of the book. Chimamanda does not shy away from exposing dynamics common in violent homes. For instance, Papa sets the tone of the home environment. Each family member dances to his tune, a dance between following rules, appeasement, punishment. So contrast is a strong theme. And Papa is perceived, and you alluded to this earlier, Papa is perceived to be like a saint in the community. His benevolence, and he's generous with donations, but in reality to his family, he's abusive and cruel. There is also contrast between the red hibiscus that is in the garden at Papa's home, which represents blood, and blood is symbolic in the storyline. When he beats up Mama and she bleeds. And then there is the purple hibiscus at Auntie's house, which represents freedom, finding your voice, and identity. So there's a play on contrast throughout the entire book, from oppression to freedom to a new life. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think it's so interesting what you say there about contrast, because there's also the contrast between, national violence in terms of war or the coup as it happens, and then violence within a family. Yes. And also, what you mentioned earlier, the violence begetting the violence. When you look at it from the national perspective, it's just a long, long, long cycle of violence from one regime to the next. So I found it very interesting that in the nations or in the country or political story of looking for some respite or freedom, there is a violent method used. And it kind of mirrors the journey of freedom for this family as well. So that contrast to me was very, very interesting. And how we often refer to nation states as she. The fact that Kambili, a young girl, is at the center of the story, I think there's such a wonderful mirroring between the two. So as you know, we love on the book club to always have a reading from the author. But because I couldn't get Chimamanda here, I'm just going to make you do it. So Sarah, please read to us from Purple Hibiscus.
Sure. I'm going to start right at the beginning, intentionally, because it's an ode to Chinua Achebe by Chimamanda. Things started to fall apart at home when my brother, Jaja, did not go to communion, and Papa flung his heavy missile across the room and broke the figurines on the etagere. We had just returned from church. Mama placed the fresh palm fronds, which were wet with holy water, on the dining table, and then went upstairs to change. Later, she would knot the palm fronds into sagging cross shapes and hung them on the wall beside our gold-framed family photo. They would stay there until next Ash Wednesday, when we would take the fronds to church to have them burnt for ash. Papa, wearing a long grey robe like the rest of the oblates, helped distribute ash every year. His line moved the slowest because he pressed hard on each forehead to make a perfect cross with his ash-covered thumb, and slowly, meaningfully enunciated every word of "dust, and unto dust you shall return."
Lovely. And I love the fact that you chose the piece that was an ode to Chinua Achebe, because that first line is so amazing. It's been another great edition of the book club as we've talked Purple Hibiscus. See you again next week, same time, as we celebrate another fabulous African female author. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay true. And right here on the book club, we're saying cheers to another season of talking books, talking women, and the stories behind them. Goodbye.
There's just something special about The Polygamist. And I think it's to do with the time at which Zimbabweans got to know of it, or a time that it was now widespread within the Zimbabwean market.
We don't only know women like that, but each one of us as women has a part of Essie in us, Joyce in us, even Lindani, and even Matipa in us. And those people in us are at war every time we encounter somebody that we love or are attracted to. And, then we make our choices. These women made theirs. The question is now, what will we make of our choices?